This is Paul Schneiderman today on the 92nd edition of Sports Untold on Rainier Avenue Radio. My show is known as Sports and Stuff for many years. Now we're doing a little rebranding, and it's called Sports Untold, but Sports and Stuff still sounds good. Well, in the 92nd edition of Sports Untold, I have a terrific guest. I had the pleasure of interviewing for the second time Mark Pattison. Mark is a Northeast Seattle, Roosevelt High School, University of Washington legend, former NFL player. He's been an entrepreneur, podcaster, motivational speaker, entrepreneur, mountain climber. I mean, it's the list of what Mark's done is very impressive. And Mark just did something that's pretty darn extraordinary. He just climbed Mount Everest. So I'm talking to a guy who has now climbed the 7 major summits and just got back from climbing Mount Everest. So pretty amazing. And Mark was one of my first guests come to my show back in 2017. I think you were on the 4th edition. Now you're on the 92nd edition. So still struggling, trying to do this. Well, as I mentioned to you, Mark, off the air, my assistant, Lucius Tenebris, and recording engineer, is also fascinated by your experience at Mount Everest. So Lucius is going to come here and ask a few questions as well. So we're going to have fun today, Mark. Well, thanks for coming back on Sports Untold on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love the intro. I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me. And, love talking to Seattle peeps anytime I get a chance.
Love it. Well, we enjoy chatting with you as well, Mark. Well, Mark, we're going to talk heavily about your climbing experiences today, but hey, it's a sports show. I want to get a few other questions into you. So I have been asking this question to multiple guests the last year and a half or so. Let me give you a couple of the answers, and I want to get the Mark Pattison to answer this question. Dave Grosby answered Floyd Merriweather. Mariners radio broadcaster Dave Sims answered Sandy Koufax. Softy and Dick Fang, when I interviewed them, answered Tiger Woods. Kenny Anderson, former NBA player, answered Joe Montana. Greg Lewis answered LeBron James. I could give you more answers. One more, Serena Williams, her name came up. Mark, if you could interview or have an extended conversation with a living sports figure, who would it be?
Jimmy Connors.
Jimmy Connors.
Yeah.
The tennis player.
Yeah.
What is about Connors? I hadn't got that answer yet. What is about Jimmy Connors that would fascinate you?
I just love his intensity, and, he's a guy that played into his 40s, and, it wasn't too long ago that I saw a special on him where I think he didn't win the US Open in, I think it was played in New York, but he made it into the semis and finally just, wore out, but he was just a warrior that just never gave up. Perseverance. And, this goes way back. This isn't my answer like I'm giving you today. I mean, I remember when really my first opportunity after being just buried in the University of Washington Husky football program. And it seemed like I was going to see no light, but I kept chipping away. And finally I got my opportunity, and we were playing Michigan in the Husky Stadium. We found ourselves down by 14 points. And in the fourth quarter, we mounted this comeback, and then we scored a touchdown with about, 7 minutes to go. We got the ball back with about 2 minutes to go. We marched down the field, and I caught kind of a last second touchdown in the back of the end zone. And it's really back then, where I first started to really connect. I don't play tennis. I used to belong to the tennis club, as you know. I don't play tennis, and I don't really have a passion about tennis, but I have a passion about people who push it, and it's always about what's next, what's around the corner, and they're not looking back. Everything is about going forward, and no matter whatever happens, they don't give up.
Mark, one thing I think is really neat about your answer is you're not a tennis guy, as you just mentioned, but Jimmy Connors is the living sports figure you most likely want to have a chat with. So I think it's really neat that you're kind of going outside your own box and picking Jimmy Connors with that question.
Yeah.
Mark, go ahead.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Let me just.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think it's really important. I keep saying this whole thing about if you're not growing, you're dying, and I think that's just really true, and just in life, and whether it's business or sports or hobby or whatever you want to call it, it's what are those things that are going to make you grow? And the only way to me you can really grow is by finding mentors out there that have done it in some other capacity, because everybody has their own way of doing it. And the common theme with me is success leaves clues. And if you don't, so much time we spent like just so immersed in what I can't figure it out. I'm trying to get there. And if I could just, and your own little orbit, and by really taking a time out and looking at some other people and either talking to them, reading a book, hearing a podcast, whatever, it's a fast track towards where you can take yourself and whatever you're trying to do.
Great advice. I assume you give a lot of that advice to your motivational seminars. Well, yeah, I like the Jimmy Connors answer a lot. All right, Mark. Here's kind of my follow-up question. I can give you a couple of names if you want. Who's a deceased sports figure in history you would have loved to have interviewed, had an extended conversation with?
Sir Edmund Hillary. He was the first guy to actually summit Mount Everest.
Edmund Hillary.
Yeah, Sir
Yeah, that's a
Edmund
great
Hillary.
name.
Yeah, yeah.
Was he an American?
No, it was interesting because if you go back in Everest history, and I spent a lot of time doing this because again, success leaves clues, and I want to understand, what they were doing, how they got up there, and it blows my mind that in 1953, both he and Tenzing Norway actually summited the top of Mount Everest. They were British, obviously. Tenzing Norway was from Nepal. He was a lead Sherpa, but Sir Edmund Hillary was a UK British citizen. And the British back in that day, and earlier, decade before, they were sending gigantic expedition parties over there to try to figure this out, to become the first country, so to speak, to actually summit the highest mountain in the world. And so, if I could step back in time and interview him when I was there, I went into a number of different museums. I saw these artifacts. I mean, I had all this gear on and oxygen masks and big puffy suits, and I had all the right stuff. They were going up in tweed suits,
Right.
like you're wearing your jacket today. You look sharp. I mean, that's what they look like, and they're at 29,000 feet. It's insane what they were wearing going up and down that mountain.
What a great answer. And I asked you a dumb question if he was an American when I heard Sir Edmund Hillary, but
Yeah.
what a fascinating answer. I'm going to add him to my list of answers to that question. I've got Muhammad Ali, got Babe Ruth. What a great answer. Well, Mark, I'm going to get into a few other non-climbing sports subjects because it's always fun to talk about all sorts of subject matters, sports included. But I'm going to ask. This is kind of a maybe an odd first question about your Mount Everest experience, but because I know you're just getting thousands from different people. But Mark, what would be the first question you would ask somebody who just completed a climb Mount Everest?
Well, I'm getting a range of questions, and you're asking me the question, not what others are asking. But it seems like there's kind of two distinctive questions that keep coming up with very different answers, or they didn't know. One was when I tell them I was on Mount Everest for over 2 months, and people are blown away. And then the question is, well, why are you there for 2 months? And it's really answering that question by saying, number one, you are going up and down the mountain constantly at very high altitude to build up red blood cells, and red blood cells are the things that carry oxygen around your body so that you can survive and you can make it. In my case, it really came into play big time the night after I summited and while I was coming down off the mountain. And then number two, the reason why you were there for 2 months is because their jet stream sits on top of the mountain blowing 200 miles per hour. And
Wow.
and so the way that the planet works is 2 weeks. It's not 14 days. It could be 7 days. It could be 3 days, like it was in 2019 when you saw that big lineup on the mountain. And it could be a little bit longer. You just never know. But the jet stream rises and allows safe passage, technically, theoretically, to get up and get down off that mountain. And then it also does the same thing in the fall. And so we're going up and down and up and down and up and down and building red blood cells and working our way through the ice fall and all these different things while waiting for sometime in May to go for the top. And so
A
that's the
real
reason why you're there.
process.
It's a real process. So that's why. So that's one question. Why are you there so long? And then the other question is, what was it like when you got on the top? And so many people, they equate it to like when I've been very fortunate to be, the guy that catches the last second touchdown and the crowd goes crazy. And what was that like? That was amazing, right? And you're up and the crowd's going crazy and you're on TV and all these amazing things. And it wasn't like that for me because, I struggled a lot. We can get into that later. I struggled a lot on the mountain. And by the time I got up there and I sat down, I was like, oh God, I've got halfway to go still. I mean, I was only, I still had to go all the way down, and going down is almost way more dangerous than going up because You're so tired, you're so spent, and the margin of error is so thin because it's so flippin' steep, and you're looking straight down 15,000 feet at Tibet. And if you slip and you fall, you're done. You're stepping over dead bodies and everything. And so that's kind of the surprising next answer, because they're waiting for this. It was the most amazing thing I've ever done. And it was just like, oh God, now I got to go the other way.
Well, you just gave me so much information. I may actually, I know you're a podcaster yourself. You were the first one I've ever tried that type of question. What type of question, would you ask someone for based on your experience? So I just love the answers you gave and the questions you gave, because I think you just helped me get some more ideas, because I frankly, I'm a little overwhelmed talking to a guy just climb Mount Everest, and I wanted you to kind of start with the first answers and questions.
Well, yeah, and to your point too, Paul, is there's it's different from going up to a local mountain like Mount Rainier, for example, which anybody, if they wanted to, you have to get in shape and everything, but basically it's a 3-day climb, and there are some things that you need to know, and then certainly people have died on the mountain. But it's a whole different level on Mount Everest when you're going up to 29,032 feet.
Oh, sure.
And, we started as a whole, there's all these other wild cards that came into play this year. One was COVID, and we can get into that later if you like, but basically a big COVID outbreak hit. And then the other thing, which hit before and after in May, was a cyclone, which cyclone is basically the same thing as a hurricane, but on that side of the world. And so with that came amazing amount of high winds and tremendous amount of moisture, which lower temperatures, it's rain, and higher temperatures, it's snow. And that's what a lot of people run into. So only 30%. So if there was 400, there was probably a little bit less than 400 climbers this year. And of those 400, maybe 120, something like that made it. So it's just between not picking the right day, and we just happened to get lucky and pick the right day, to a lot of people being flown off the mountain because of COVID. It was a tough go for a lot of people, and I'm just sitting here so blessed and thankful that I got that thing over with, and somehow or another I was able to get myself up there and back down.
No, it's so great. You did it, and you came back home safely as well. Hey, Mark, I read something that you were partially blind in one eye at one time during the climb. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah. So, when you decide to go for the top, it's not like you pop out of your car and like, hey, let's go climb this mountain, come back down. It's really projecting what the weather is going to be like based on in our case, the cyclone that was blowing, based on the jet stream that kept bouncing on and off the mountain, based on when we're going to have a clear day to go for it. So you don't run into that into thin air mess that those guys ran into back in 1996 with the superstorm and everybody dying. And so so fast forward in clock, we had projected actually that we are going to try to go forward around the 20th. Well, that day was a mess. And so we stayed in our tents in high winds on Camp 3. And then we moved up to Camp 4, which is high camp, 26,500 feet, on the 22nd. I arrived in the camp around 6 p.m. and we woke up at about midnight with the plan of leaving around 12:30. And as I was getting out of my tent and getting everything, scrambling and getting stuff ready, there were high winds, 45, 50 mile per hour blowing left to right. And there was all these little ice particles, and these ice particles were pounding my face on the left. And then my eye was just getting thrashed, and I was trying to pull kind of my hoodie over and protect it, but it just wasn't working. It's pitch black. You've got a headlamp on and you're going straight up the mountain. And so within an hour, I got snow blind in my left eye. When you're snow blind, it just means you literally can't see out of your both eyes, or in my case, my left eye. And where that really came into play is further up on the Hillary Step, and that's about the last third of the mountain. And as you're going there, it's getting super steep. The entire time you're on fixed lines. And unlike other mountains where you and I might be tethered together, you're tethered to the mountain. So you have a harness around your waist. You've got probably a 3-foot cord with a carabiner on the end of it. And what you're doing is you're reaching down and you're clipping into this fixed line that are about 100 yard intervals screwed into the ice with ice screws. And so you're secure. The only problem with that is that there's not only do you have your one fixed line, but there are 4 or 5 other fixed lines too from 2012 past expeditions that were all frayed. And so I was having a really hard time seeing because I didn't have the right depth perception of clipping in. And again, as I said before, when I got up on the Hillary step, it's really rocky and it's super steep, and you have a very small area to be going up. And as you're making your way to the summit, and so I had to double check, triple check to make sure that I was actually clipped into the right rope. And what complicated all this is my Sherpa, who was with me most of the day, couldn't speak English, and he didn't understand what I was saying. I kept pointing to my eye, and he thought, "Oh yeah, that's great. You're having a great time." He didn't understand I was going through all this struggle.
Just amazing. It was beyond just having no vision, one eye, all these other multi factors that were going on. Paul Schneiderman, host of Sports Untold on Rainier Avenue Radio with Mark Pattison, who just climbed Mount Everest, and the first NFL player to climb all 7 summits, right, Mark?
Well,
Former
close.
NFL player.
Yeah, no. So the whole goal going back, 10 years is going through a rough patch. And, the whole thing was like, I needed to pull myself out of it. And so I just one night I was walking around the block and I was just like, I'm done being stuck and I'm going to do something about it. And so I said to myself, I can't just have some little goal. I've got to do something extraordinary. And so what came up to me was, especially being from Seattle, and you look out your window every day and you see, Mount Rainier, spent a lot of time in the Cascades. It's just like, there's been so many amazing mountaineers. I'm going to see if any NFL guys ever climbed the 7th summit. So I went after it. So as it all turned out, in 2019, there was another gentleman who actually played at Oregon State. And in 2009, he had completed the 7 summits. And so it was sort of a race. It sort of he wasn't going on it with the same vigor, but he'd been doing it for a number of years. He's maybe 10, 15 years older than myself. His name is Craig Hanneman. Anyways, the long and short out of it is when somebody disclosed this to me about a year ago, I had decided, like, I'm going to double down on this goal, and I'm going to do 2 things. One, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. I'm going to come down, crawl in my tent for a few hours, and then go up and climb Lhotse, which is right next to it. And that's the 4th highest mountain in the world. And I ran into so many problems, running out of oxygen, not eating for 18 hours, being exposed, being snowblind, everything else, that as I was coming down and I was going through a lot of, like, I was to the edge, to the point of, today Mark doesn't die conversation with me. I mean, you don't have those conversations with yourself that often.
Wow.
And I was just like, if I go for Lhotse at this point in time in the game, I will not make it up this mountain. And having stepped over dead bodies and sleeping next to one 6 feet from my tent at high camp, 26,500, I knew I'd probably be another statistics. And at that point, it was just like, who cares? So I'm the second NFL player. We're still just Craig and I, who are the only guys who have climbed it. I doubt there's going to be many more that will attempt it, just because of the NFL body and the shape and everything else and the motivation. But I'm just proud to have done what I've done, and be in that select.
Absolutely.
Group.
Very, very, very select group. Let me ask you a question. I'm going to have Lucius come in here and ask a question or two, because he wants to meet you and get a question or two in here. I'm curious, Mark, about the timing of when you decide to do this. And with this worldwide pandemic going on, was there any side of you that would just wait till 2022 or 2023 or some other time this decade to do Mount Everest? Tell us about your decision to do it when you did it in May of 2021.
Well, let's go back, and the chronology of what I was trying to do is do a mountain every year. And I thought it would be 7 mountains, 7 years. And in 2017, I got pushed back on Denali. So I had to go back and redo Denali after making that. And we ran into minus 80-degree weather and all this stuff. And so I had to redo that one. And then in early 2019, in January, I was down in Antarctica and I climbed a mountain called Vincent Massif. I was able to summit that mountain successfully and then come back. And then the goal was to go to Mount Everest in 2020. I had been training hard for it. I'd been going, cuckoo in terms of all the things I need to do to make that happen. And then I packed my bags. I live here in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I packed my bags to drive out to Los Angeles, see my daughters, and then from there launch to Kathmandu. This was mid-March 2020. If we go back, a year and some months, we all remember that that's about when COVID hit and the world started breaking apart. In late March, the world, in fact, did shut down, and my Everest expedition aspirations got pushed into 2021. And so, answering your question, the thing that I was most nervous about, and I had to squeak by to make this happen, I probably entered a kind of a gray area how this all played out. But my biggest concern was not necessarily, goes back to like February of this year, was not necessarily about what was going to go on Mount Everest, but was I going to get vaccinated? That was the thing that was most pressing, because I got the Pfizer vaccine, and to get the Pfizer vaccine here in Idaho and well every place else, it's a get the vaccine and then wait a month.
Right.
So I was still, for my age and category and all this stuff, I didn't fit into the box of when people in my category could actually get vaccinated. So anyways, I made that work and I got over there, and sure enough, we had some guys. We started with 21 people in our expedition party, and from the first day we got there, within a day, we took COVID test, and one of the climbers, so unfortunate, got COVID, and so he didn't make it. But of the 21 that started, including this guy, only 10 in our party actually summited the mountain.
10 of the original 21 did.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Hey, Lucius, come over here. I think you had a fun question for Mark. I'm going to come back with some more questions, Mark. But let me get Lucius in here.
Yeah. Lucius.
Hi, Lucius. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah. Are you a rapper or anything?
Am I what?
Are you a rapper?
I am a poet, but I'm not a rapper, at least not yet.
Anybody with a name like Lucius needs to be a rapper.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I get a lot of compliments for my name. But I know you mentioned that there was you saw dead bodies on there on the mountain. I'm curious, how was it just people that were a part of your team, or did you see other people that you didn't know? And when you did, how did it make you feel?
Well, okay, so there's nobody from our team that died, up on the mountain. So that's the good news. There's a gentleman, American, unfortunately, that died. There are actually one British and one American that died around the 12th of May. There was a small window that opened and then it shut again just after the 15th of May. But this particular person had died of exhaustion. They were laying in a tent at 26,500, which is Camp 4, and they just happened to be next to my tent, and it was pretty eerie to see that. And then I knew what I was walking into on this one, but up on the Hillary Step, my tent mate in Antarctica, Don Cash, had passed away in 2019. He got to the top, raised his hand, fell over, and died. And very unfortunate. And so there he was laying there. And answering your last question, what's it like? When you're here on basically Earth at sea level, and you're having you and I are having this conversation. I'm having this conversation with Paul, and it's almost like going to war where the rules change when you're there and bullets are flying by you. I've never been to war, but that's what I've heard so many stories about. It's just a different reality, and you're in such a zone of self-preservation when you're at essentially 28,900 feet, and you're trying to navigate your way. In my case, I was snowblind. I hadn't eaten anything. I was relying on little hard candies, and had very little energy. And my whole time was just get yourself up, clip in, keep going. And, it was very little time for empathy, even though I'm sitting here now saying, what a tragedy it was for anybody to have to die on a mountain.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine you're just in survival mode at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind if I asked you one last question?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
You said that going down the mountain was in some ways harder than going up the mountain. I'm curious, would you say that going down the mountain was the hardest part, or was there another part of the trip that you found to be the most difficult?
There were just multiple levels, to that question. And, there were some days, there was one particular day that we were going from Camp 1 to Camp 2, you're going up the Western Coombs, and it's riddled with crevasses everywhere, and so you have to stay on this very narrow path. You're clipped in, but it was smoking hot. And even though if there were the ambient temperature might have been 0 or something, all the sun bouncing off the snow coming back at you, and what we were wearing just made it smoking hot to get from Camp 1 to Camp 2. It's a gradual uphill, and then going through the Kumba icefall is literally terrifying. You're talking about a 2,000-foot gain from 17.5 to 19.5. You're talking about going through a moving glacier of 30-foot high ice columns that are collapsing constantly. Every single time I went through there 5 times. Every single time I went through, there was always a new route. We had to climb over, 40 to 60-foot ice walls. We had to rappel off them. A lot of people have died in there. Avalanches coming down on summit day. Normally I'm a super strong climber. That day I wasn't strong. I hadn't eaten in 3 days. And it was just, when you're at 29,000 feet, it's just the every single time you take a step, even with an oxygen mask on, it's like you're doing a 100-yard dash sprint. You're breathing, you're up and down, you take another step and you have to pause, and then take another step and take a pause. And then, you kind of put all those factors together. And when you're coming down, it's when most people get hurt, because you're so exhausted and your legs collapse and you trip or something. And so really staying focused in on what I was trying to do. And the other thing that really happened that played could have been a deadly outcome for me, is that I ran out of oxygen just under the balcony, probably at 27.5. And my Sherpa was 200 yards plus down below me, and I couldn't get him to stop. And so I was just gasping for air. And it's a pretty scary feeling when you have all those things going against you, snow blind, no energy, you're going down, your legs are sore from the front because it's so steep, and you have no oxygen at that height. I mean, that's where airplanes fly, right?
Wow.
So anyways, I'm lucky in a lot of ways that everything played out the way it played out in terms of getting down safely.
Wow. I apologize. Another question just came to my mind. Would you mind if I asked one more?
Yeah. Ask as many as you want.
Absolutely.
Is for someone who's interested in climbing Mount Everest themselves, but hasn't started training yet and hasn't really gotten into it, what would you say to them?
There is no shortcuts to the top. Number one. Number two is we had 3 gentlemen that tried this express package, which meant that they hadn't done a little climbing, not a lot. And they came a month late, and how they compensated for that was they had tents that they would go and they'd sleep in that would emulate them being at 22,000 feet, just because there's less oxygen in those tents. And all 3 of those people did not summit. 2 of them quit along the way, 2 weeks into it. And one guy just quit on the mountain. So, like anything you do in life, like my journey to the NFL, I didn't go from Little League. Paul knows my neighborhood in Seattle, in Northeast Seattle, and LVR, Lower View Ridge. And you don't go from Little League to the NFL in one jump. It takes all these iterative steps. And just like business, it just takes years and years and learn of business acumen to learn how to do certain things and do it the right way. And just like mountaineering, that's why I did 7 summits. I actually have the summits I did. I was on Denali twice, and I did Kilimanjaro twice down in Africa. And then beyond that, there's all the local mountains around here. I've done, Mount Whitney down in California, the highest mountain there. I've done Mount Rainier a couple of years ago. I've been on Bora, which is the highest mountain in Idaho. So there's a lot of mountains. I mean, I'm on the mountain almost every single day, and it's just training my mind and training my body to be able to endure certain things when bad things happen, which they do all the time on these various mountains.
Wow. Wow. That's really inspiring. That makes me almost makes me want to start climbing mountains.
Well, I probably have been on the top of, there's a local mountain outside of Seattle, Washington in Issaquah called Tiger Mountain. And it's no exaggeration to say I've been on top of that mountain at least 150 times when I was living up in Seattle. And
Wow.
so that's year round, every single week, winter, rain, spring, summer, sunny weather, bad weather, if I said I was going this week, I was going that week, and nothing would stop me. And that's what you have to go through to be committed to the process.
Wow, definitely. Wow. Well, thank you. I really appreciate your answers.
Absolutely.
Great questions from Lucius and great, fascinating answers from Mark. Hey, Mark, was there anything fun about climbing Mount Everest? I mean, hearing all this, was there anything fun about it at all?
Kind of like like an NFL or a college locker room. At the end of the day, it's a lot of the people. I got to interact with so many different, the Sherpa, the way that they live life in Nepal. I was blessed 3 or 4 times by these various holy lamas. I got to sit in their ceremonies. Our mountaineering expedition team, they're all fascinating people. And like I said, we started with 21 and we kind of got down to the core 10 or 11 towards the end. And we all have something in common. Everybody's, a go-getter and kind of an alpha dog. And it's just fun to mix it up with those people and really learn from others. And also, for me personally, I grew up a fan of the Whitaker brothers, Jim
Sure.
and Lou. Jim was the first American to climb Mount Everest in 1973. And at Viesters, I become friends with all these people, and just to kind of be in the presence of some of these people, other phenomenal mountaineers that happen to be on that mountain at that particular time, to become friends with them and climb with them and interact with them.
Would you ever climb any of the 7 summits you did ever again?
Let me say it this way. Coming off that mountain, it was a tough experience, as it got towards the end there. I mean, it's just going back to your first question about, what's a common question you get? It's just how long you're there. So it's an endurance game. Even if you didn't climb to the top, it's an endurance game just to be anywhere with having no luxuries of life for over 60 days, a shower and good food and a warm bed and a pillow and all those things, and sleeping in minus 0 temperatures every night. It gets old. And so I just don't want to suffer.
Right.
That's a game of suffering, and your body, once you get up to the death zone, you're actually dying. And I could feel my body eating away at myself. And I lost 25 pounds. And for me, that's a lot. And so again, I'm just really interested in I love climbing. I'm up in the mountains again most days, and doing that and coming back and having a nice warm meal and the bed and all that stuff. That's what I'm more interested in right now.
You got time for a little some sports questions, Mark?
Let's do it.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
great. I want to get your take on the NCAA case that came down with the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'm not looking for a technical legal analysis, just kind of want to get your general take. Justice Kavanaugh had a fascinating concurring opinion. Just a little quick background. NCAA, the Supreme Court ruled that the NCAA cannot limit education-related benefits. Kavanaugh went further in his concurring opinion. He wrote that he believes all restrictions on compensating college athletes could violate antitrust law. Mark, what do you think of the idea of paying college athletes at some point? Where are you on that, Mark?
I think it's a great idea. I'm not quite sure how you do it, but I just know this, and this is the same. We had the exact same argument 30 years ago, and I'll tell you why. Is that I was fortunate to be on scholarship, and I can remember myself and Hugh Millen and Jim Mora. We were all lived together, and we had a total check. We'd go down to the Tubby Graves office, and that's where you'd pick up your check every month. And our check was for $336.84. That's what it was. And if you can imagine that, living off $336.84, and that's to cover your rent, and that's to cover any other bills you have that come associated with the electrical bill, and also going out and getting something to eat. And so the disparity between the amount of money, especially now, that the NCAA makes off the tournaments, off the bowl games, off all the TV rights and everything else, proportionate to what they actually can give and support these college. It's just been so out of whack. So I don't know, because not every player is the same. So, I don't know if it's right that on a team, if there's 85 scholarships and some are freshmen and they're working their way up, and some are the stars and they're actually playing, that they get more money than the guys who aren't, or you just set a tier that is enough that people aren't going to be tempted to take outside money from donors, which is illegal. And it also keeps these people from feeling like they can stay in school longer and they don't make bad decisions. But, I was restricted from working. So if that's another thing that people don't understand. So beyond just what you're saying, they were telling me that during the spring, during the winter, during the fall, I could not go work any place. The only time I could work is when school was not in session, when I was not actually actively taking classes. So for me, that would be during the summer. So I went up to Alaska. I was on a fishing boat for 2 months. I worked in a lumberyard for 3 years, but I could only doing that during certain times. And so once again, I was always in this cash starved position. I remember going over to Hawaii on a recruiting trip. And so they were whining and dining me, and it was, you're on the beach and it was amazing and all that kind of stuff. And kind of towards the end, I said, so let me ask you this. So now it's, we're done and I want to go home for Christmas. How does that work? And he goes, well, we put you to work, for a week at a construction site, and then you make enough money to pay for your ticket and you fly home. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. Right. So I'm going to go to UW, right, where I can just drive home. It's only 4 miles from my house. And that's what I did. But there was so many guys that came from East LA, Central LA, that were not in the same situation I was in, that were always struggling. And we had them over to our house, frequently for various meals to compensate that. So yeah, I'm all for figuring out a way to equal the playing field a little bit more.
Mark, you brought up a lot of points there, and Kavanaugh actually alluded to this in his concurring opinion, and it's the highest court of the land, that it could get complicated with Title IX issues. Does a female rower get paid the same as a star quarterback? Those are complicated issues, aren't they, Mark?
Well, they are, and this has always been it always runs downhill, and this has been the argument for forever, which is essentially that you want to have as many sports as possible, and you want to have them equal on both sides. But the reality is, typically, with the exception of maybe Kentucky or Duke, maybe there's a few others in there, but almost every program, football funds everything else. And when football's not working, it's not going downhill, then it's hard. So again, how do you make that, equal? And that's why I'm in my opinion, if you can just up the bar pro rata across the board, it's going to be a much better system.
Paul Schneiderman of Sports Untold with UW great Mark Pattison and climber. Mark's kindly giving me a few more minutes today. We're just talking sports. Hey, Mark, you're a big UW guy, and there's been some transitions UW football program. You like the Jimmy Lake coaching situation so far?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so far, you got to give everybody a break, and it's not that often when your assistant coaches rise to a program like this without actually bringing in another big name like Chris Peterson, when he came. But it is what it is, and he seems like he's a fantastic mind. He's got a great ability to recruit. His defenses have been amazing, and when you're the head guy, it's a different set of skills. You got to be able to be a great coach. So that's obviously the first one. You have to be able to be a great recruiter. You have to be able to interact with the alumni and make sure that they continue to donate. And you have to be able to get along well with Upper Campus. And so does he have all those skill sets? I don't know. But I'm certainly here to root him on until something goes south, and hopefully it doesn't. And, all these teams, they all go in cycles. And so hopefully he can keep, the UW on the right trajectory. And it's going to be a tough game against Michigan back in Ann Arbor, I think, opening up here. So we'll see how it all goes.
I'm going to try to make that game in September. Chris Peterson. Do you like Chris Peterson?
Yeah.
Big fan of Chris. Yeah.
No, go. Oh, good.
Good. Hey, Mark, we got a couple more questions if you don't mind. Do you like this idea of a 16-team NCAA championship tournament in football?
I actually do. And I do, because so much of everything today is so top heavy with SEC in particular, right? And a little bit of the ACC. And you never know when people are going to get hot, right? And when there's a coaches poll, BCS they call it now, where you have kind of the top heavy teams, up front, and they don't weigh especially the Pac-12 as much as they do some of these other conferences. I think it gives everybody an equal chance, no different than the NCAA basketball tournament, right? And so to have more teams with the opportunity for a Rocky type story, to me, is really exciting.
I tend to agree with you. I'm going to gently challenge you and play devil's advocate for a second. I had Keith Gilbertson on my show a couple of years ago. I'm sure you know Keith,
Great
the
guy.
former
Oh,
Husky
yeah.
coach. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I asked Keith about the idea a couple of years ago about taking the top 6, giving the top 2 a bye, and having like a 6-team tournament. He didn't like that. Keith's of the opinion that more is not necessarily better. What would be your take on Keith's perspective from a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I mean, maybe 16 is too much. And I guess when you said that initially to me, I was just kind of thinking of the idea that it's more than just the 4, right? So I don't know what the exact number is. Maybe it's 8, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 16. I don't know, but I think having more of a tournament where you have all these different schools. I mean, you see it in baseball. It just happened right now with Mississippi State and Texas. I think they're in the finals. Soccer, they do it that way. Women's softball, they do it that way. The basketball, obviously, they do it that way. Volleyball, they do it that way. So why don't they do it in football? That just seems odd to me. So having kind of a bigger pool and giving people the opportunity, even though their odds might be long, I think is a fun idea. It just engages more the fan to let your school potentially get in the tournament and have a run at it.
Sure. Look how successful the March Madness basketball tournament has been, giving a lot of these smaller name schools a chance to compete. So, hey, Mark, may I have another question too, if you don't mind? Paul Stravnik on Sports Untold, Rainier Avenue Radio with Mark Pattison. I read that you had an LA Raiders hat. I'm sorry, a Vegas Raiders hat or a shirt. There was something you had referencing the Vegas Raiders during your Mount Everest climb. Feel free to share about that a little bit. But here's my question for you, Mark. Do you feel bad that Oakland does not have an NFL team anymore?
I think Oakland, look, at the end of the day, it's a crime for the community, and there's so many vendors. As we found when the Sonics left our great city of Seattle, there was a huge void. And so for that reason, I'm bummed for the community, and I think the Raiders will always be associated with Oakland. But if you've ever been down to the Oakland Coliseum, they had so many opportunities to make that right. And what all these teams around the league require to stay financially viable is to have sweet looking stadiums like Quest, where the Seahawks play, with owners boxes and luxury boxes and all the bells and whistles that go along with it. And that stadium down there, it's a baseball stadium, and it's old concrete with none of those things. And that was the major reason. And if you go back in history, Al Davis originally took that team down to Los Angeles with the promise that same thing was going to happen in LA. It didn't until it's now happened finally after all these years. So they moved back to Oakland because once again, they made those promises that would all happen, and they didn't make those things happen. And now Mark Davis, Al Davis's son, finally got a great offer. And I've been over there and I've seen that stadium, and it looks like a gigantic spaceship. It is cool. And I think it's going to be a huge hit because you've still got a lot of passionate fans that love the Raiders that will drive 3-4 hours over from LA. No big deal. And then all just the corporations coming in with their different weekend conferences and everything like that they can tie in packages to go to the Raider game. So I think it's going to be a wild success over there. And you can see with the hockey team right now already, which is across the street, that venue. I mean, when you go to that game, which I've been to, the Knights, it looks like a Cirque du Soleil show. They've really done the Vegas part to it. So I think it's going to be a great, answering your question, the Raiders have been over the moon kind to me. They've really kicked in a really strong alumni department. And not only did they throw and contribute money to a cause for organization here called Higher Ground. My daughter has epilepsy.
Right.
And so we came together and we formed this campaign called Amelia's Everest. And not only did they throw money towards that, but they sent me huge flags and shirts and hats and all kinds of stuff. And I hung on the side of my tent at base camp, Everest Base Camp, so everybody knew where it was. And the Raiders, I mean, I literally took up the whole entire side of the tent. It was really cool, and I'm really proud to be part of that organization. And those guys would, really step up and support me in the ways that they did.
Mark, just so much fun. I really appreciate doing this. And Mark, if you would ever come back and you have an ongoing invitation for a third appearance, I just love to chat with you about your LA Raiders football days some days. The first interview you had with me, we chatted on a little bit, but I just love to have you back, just talk about your Raiders days. But congratulations so much on your Mount Everest experience. And thank you for coming back on Sports Untold, and all the best. You and I will be in touch.
Right on. Thank you so much, Paul.
You too. All the best, Mark. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.